My name is Nia, and at 28 years old, I am the invisible daughter of the Wilson family. The backdrop for my birthday brunch was Le Bilboquet in Buckhead, Atlanta, where crystal glasses sparkled under Art Deco chandeliers, and my family sat dressed like they were walking a red carpet. I was the stain on their picture-perfect tableau, sitting at the far corner of the table, still wearing my chef whites because I had a double shift starting in 45 minutes. My sister Keisha wrinkled her nose and waved a manicured hand in front of her face. God, Nia, you smell like old fryer grease. It is ruining the bouquet of this Sauvignon Blanc. Her husband Brad laughed. He was the kind of guy who wore loafers without socks and thought marrying into a wealthy black family made him cool. Babe cut her some slack. Not everyone can be an influencer with six-figure brand deals. Some people have to flip burgers. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I am a sous chef at one of the top restaurants in Midtown, not a burger flipper. But correcting them was a waste of breath. My father Byron did not even look at me. He was too busy pouring sparkling water for my grandfather Ezekiel, who had just flown in from Florida for my birthday. Or so I thought. Look at this family, Dad. Byron beamed, gesturing to Keisha and Brad. Success is in our DNA. Keisha just closed a brand partnership with Gucci. And Brad is expanding his portfolio. We are building a legacy here. Grandpa Ezekiel looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. He looked past the designer bags and the gold watches. He looked straight at me. And what about you, Nia? How is life treating my youngest granddaughter? I opened my mouth to speak, but Keisha cut me off. Oh, she is fine, Granddad. Just grinding away. You know how millennials are, always struggling to find themselves. She patted my hand condescendingly. We are trying to help her upgrade her image, but it is a process. Grandpa frowned. Struggling? That is surprising. He set down his glass. I thought things would be much easier for you now. Tell me, Nia, how do you like the apartment? The view of the autumn leaves over Piedmont Park must be breathtaking right now. I stared at him, my brain short-circuited. Apartment. What apartment? I cleared my throat. Grandpa? I think you are confused. I live in a basement studio in East Point. My view is a brick wall and a dumpster. The table went silent. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of the room. Then came the sound. Clatter. My father dropped his heavy silver fork onto his plate. It sounded like a gunshot. His face went an ashy shade of gray. Byron laughed. It was a loud, fake booming laugh that made the other diners turn their heads. Oh, Dad, your memory is playing tricks on you again. We talked about this. Nia decided to rent out that unit. She is investing the income. She prefers living humbly. It keeps her grounded. He glared at me, his eyes bulging with a silent warning. Play along or else. I looked at my father. Rent it out. I did not even know it existed. Grandpa looked confused. Rent it out. But I bought that penthouse specifically for you, Nia. It is in your name. I signed the deed over 3 months ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. In my name. I own a penthouse in the most expensive building in Atlanta. Keisha kicked me hard under the table. Her sharp heel dug into my shin. Ouch, I yelped. She smiled sweetly at Grandpa. She is just overwhelmed, Granddad. You know, Nia, she is terrible with money. Dad is just helping her manage the asset so she does not squander it. Managing it, I said, my voice rising. I have student loans, Keisha. I am driving a car with a taped-up window. If I had rental income, I would not be working 80-hour weeks. Byron stood up abruptly. His chair scraped violently against the floor. Well, this has been lovely, but I think the jet lag is getting to Dad. We need to get him to the hotel to rest. He signaled the waiter for the check, ignoring the half-eaten food. He hustled Grandpa Ezekiel out of the restaurant before I could ask another question. Keisha and Brad flanked them like bodyguards, blocking me from getting close. Meet us at the valet, Nia, Byron hissed at me. Do not make a scene. 10 minutes later, I stood in the humid parking garage. My father marched up to me, his face twisted in rage. Are you crazy? Are you trying to kill him? I stepped back. Kill him. I just answered his question. What apartment, Dad? What is going on? He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. Lower your voice. You know your grandfather has a heart condition. He is confused. He mixes up details. If you upset him, if you stress him out, and he has a stroke that is on you. Do you want his blood on your hands? That is gaslighting, Dad. He seemed pretty clear about Piedmont Park. And he said it is in my name. Byron scoffed. In your name. Technically, maybe. But who paid the taxes? Who paid the HOA fees? Me. I am protecting that asset for the family. You are a sous chef, Nia. You make $40,000 a year. You have debt. If I gave you a $2 million penthouse, you would sell it for pennies just to pay off your student loans. You do not have the financial literacy to handle that kind of wealth. I am keeping it safe until you are mature enough. Mature enough. I am 28. I have a job. I pay my own bills, which is more than I can say for Keisha, who still uses your credit card. Brad stepped up, sliding his arm around Byron's shoulder. He looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Come on, Naya. Do not be ungrateful. Your dad carries this whole family on his back. You should be thanking him for handling the headaches of property ownership. Keisha needs to give you a lesson on gratitude. Maybe we can set up a seminar. I pulled my arm out of my father's grip. So I own a home I cannot enter. I have money I cannot touch. And I am supposed to say thank you while I sleep in a basement with mold in the corners. Byron adjusted his suit jacket. You sleep in a basement because you lack ambition. Do not blame me for your failures. Now go to work. And if you say one word to your grandfather, one single word about this, I will cut you off completely. No more co-signing your car lease. No more health insurance help. You will be on the street. Do you understand me? He did not wait for an answer. He got into his S-Class Mercedes. Keisha and Brad hopped into the back laughing as if nothing had happened. They drove off, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I looked at my reflection in a puddle of oil on the concrete floor. Chef White's stained, tired eyes. A woman who had just been told she was worth nothing. But as the taillights faded, my sadness turned into something cold, something hard. He said the apartment was in my name. Technically. That meant there was a paper trail. And if there was a paper trail, there was a way to find it. I pulled out my phone and looked at my bank balance. $42. Then I looked at the picture of the Sovereign building in Buckhead. I was not going to work. I was going to find my house. I called my head chef and told him I was sick. It was the first time in 4 years I had ever called out. I got into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove toward the skyline. The Sovereign was a tower of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. It was the kind of place where rappers and tech moguls lived. I parked 3 blocks away because I could not afford the valet. I walked into the lobby, my heart pounding in my throat. The floors were marble. The air smelled like expensive sandalwood. A concierge in a suit that cost more than my car stood behind a massive desk. Can I help you, miss? He looked me up and down, taking in the kitchen shoes and the smell of garlic on my clothes. I stood up straighter. Yes, I am here to deliver a package for the penthouse. Penthouse 05. He raised an eyebrow. Do not lie, Nia. My conscience whispered. But I needed to know. I do not have a delivery scheduled. What is the name? I swallowed hard. Ezekiel Brooks. He typed on his computer. No. Mr. Brooks does not reside here. My heart sank. Had Grandpa been confused? Was Dad right? Maybe it was all a senile dream. Then the concierge continued. Unit 05 is registered to a Ms. Nia Wilson. Are you delivering to her? The room spun. Nia Wilson. That was me. It was real. He said my name. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Yes, that is her. Is she in? He checked his screen again. Ms. Wilson does not live on site primarily, but her husband is currently upstairs. He just called down for dry cleaning. Husband. I am single. I have been single for 2 years. Who was in my apartment? Oh, right, I said, forcing a smile. My husband. Is he alone? The concierge lowered his voice. I believe his sister-in-law is with him. They arrived together an hour ago. Sister-in-law, Brad, and Keisha. They were in my house. The house my father said was being rented out. The house he said I was too immature to manage. They were living in it, playing house in my inheritance. Thank you, I mumbled. I forgot the package in the car. I turned and walked out before my knees gave way. I sat on a bench outside the building watching the entrance. Rage burned through my veins hot and fast. They were not just stealing from me. They were mocking me, living in luxury while I scraped by. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned the color of old bone. The smell of exhaust fumes from the parking garage still clung to my clothes, mixing with the faint, lingering scent of the restaurant kitchen's grease. My father's threat echoed in the small, stifling cabin of my beat-up Honda. He would cut me off. He would leave me on the street. But the truth was, I was already on the street. I was living in a basement that flooded every time it rained, eating staff meals to save money and drowning in debt, while he drove a car that cost more than my entire education. The fear that usually kept me compliant, the fear of losing the tiny scraps of support he threw my way, began to evaporate. It was replaced by a cold, hard curiosity. Grandpa Ezekiel had been specific. He was not a man who minced words, and he certainly was not senile. View of Piedmont Park. Bought 3 months ago. In my name. I put the car in reverse, the transmission making that familiar grinding noise that usually made me wince. Today, I did not even hear it. I pulled up the map on my phone. If the apartment had a view of Piedmont Park and was purchased recently by a man of my grandfather's means, it wasn't going to be just any building. It would be the best building. There were only 3 residential towers in Buckhead that fit the description of luxury my family felt entitled to. The first was the Waldorf Astoria, but the view angles were wrong. The second was the St. Regis, but that was mostly hotel guests. That left the Sovereign. It was the crown jewel of the skyline, a twisting tower of glass and steel that looked down on the rest of Atlanta like a king on a throne. I drove toward Peachtree Road, the scenery changing from the gray concrete of the parking garage to the manicured tree-lined avenues of Buckhead. This was the Atlanta my sister Keisha lived in. The Atlanta of valet parking designer boutiques and $6 lattes. My Honda, with its taped-up rear window and fading paint, stuck out like a sore thumb among the Bentleys and Porsches. I could feel the eyes of drivers in the other lanes, their gazes sliding over me with that dismissive gloss I knew so well. They saw a service worker. They saw someone who didn't belong. They had no idea I was driving to claim my inheritance. I decided not to park in the valet. I couldn't bear the look the attendant would give me when I handed over my keys, nor did I have the cash to tip him. I found a metered spot 3 blocks away and walked. The humidity was rising, making my chef's uniform stick to my back. I smoothed down the front of my jacket, trying to look less like I had just come off a double shift and more like someone who had business in a multi-million-dollar building. I took a deep breath, channeling the composure I used when a dinner rush went off the rails, and pushed through the revolving glass doors of the Sovereign. The lobby was silent and freezing cold. It smelled of expensive leather and white tea. The floors were polished marble that reflected the recessed lighting, and the walls were adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than my life's earnings. In the center of the room, behind a desk that looked like it was carved from a single block of obsidian, stood the concierge. He was a man in his 50s, impeccable in a charcoal suit, his posture rigid. He looked up as I approached his eyes, scanning me from my non-slip kitchen shoes to my messy bun. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was smooth, professional, and utterly unwelcoming. He clearly assumed I was DoorDash, or perhaps a lost cleaning lady. I walked right up to the desk, placing my hands on the cool stone surface to stop them from trembling. I decided to play the part he expected, but with a twist. I needed information, and the only way to get it was to lie. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am here to drop off a package for Mr. Ezekiel Brooks. It is regarding the new apartment purchase." I tried to sound bored efficient like a courier who had a dozen other stops to make. The concierge frowned slightly, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He didn't type anything immediately, he just looked at me, assessing the validity of my claim. "Brooks," he repeated, tasting the name. "We do not have a resident by that name, miss. Deliveries are usually handled through the service entrance around the back, but if you aren't on the list, I cannot accept anything." My heart hammered against my ribs. Dad was right. Grandpa didn't live here. Maybe the apartment wasn't here. Maybe I was chasing a ghost. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to be sure. "Please check again," I insisted, injecting a note of irritation into my voice. "It is the penthouse unit, Unit 05. My instructions were very specific. It was a gift purchase. The paperwork might be under a different name, but the reference is Ezekiel Brooks. The concierge sighed a tiny puff of air through his nose that signaled his annoyance at my persistence. He typed something into his system, the clicks of the keyboard echoing loudly in the quiet lobby. He squinted at the screen, scrolling down a list. I watched his eyes, waiting for a flicker of recognition, a nod, anything. "I am sorry," he said, his tone final. "Unit 05 is occupied, but there is no Ezekiel Brooks associated with the property. You have the wrong building. Occupied." The word hung in the air. If it was occupied, then someone was living there. Who? If Grandpa bought it, why wasn't his name on it? Unless my father had already transferred it. Unless he had put it in his own name. "Who is the owner then?" I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. "I need to confirm delivery. If I go back to my boss with the undelivered package, I lose my fee. Can you just tell me the last name on the registry so I can match it?" The concierge gave me a look that was pure pity mixed with disdain. "I cannot disclose resident information, miss. That is a violation of privacy policy. You need to leave." I felt the tears pricking my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of frustration. I was so close. I knew it. I could feel it in my gut. Grandpa had described the view perfectly. I took a step back, ready to give up, ready to accept that I was just the crazy daughter my father said I was. But then the concierge's phone rang. He held up a hand to silence me and picked up the receiver. "Front desk," he said. "Yes, sir. I can have that sent up immediately." "No problem. I will let the valet know to bring the car around in 20 minutes. "Yes, Mr. Wilson." Wilson. My breath hitched. Wilson was my last name. It was my father's last name. The concierge hung up the phone and looked back at me, his expression slightly more alert. "Wait," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Did you say the package was for the penthouse?" "Yes." I nodded vigorously. "Unit 05. He looked at his screen again, then back at me. "It is strange," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "The deed is under a Wilson. Nia Wilson." The world stopped. The marble floor, the art, the concierge. Everything dissolved into a blur of white noise. Nia Wilson. He had said my name. Not Byron Wilson. Not Keisha Wilson. Nia Wilson. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my fingernails scraped against the stone. "Nia Wilson," I repeated, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "You are sure?" "Yes," he said, looking at me with renewed suspicion. "Ms. Nia Wilson is the listed owner. Is that who you are delivering to?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh hysterically. I wanted to vomit. It was true. Grandpa wasn't confused. He wasn't senile. He had bought the apartment for me. It was mine. Legally on paper in the system of the most exclusive building in Atlanta, I was the owner of a penthouse. I owned this. And yet, I was standing in the lobby like a beggar while someone else was upstairs. Yes, I whispered. That is who the package is for. Is she in? The concierge shook his head. Ms. Wilson is rarely here. From what I understand, she travels frequently. We mostly deal with her husband. My knees almost gave out. I had to lean heavily against the desk to stay upright. Husband. I didn't have a husband. I hadn't been on a date in 2 years because I was working 80 hours a week to pay off the debts my father refused to help with. Who was pretending to be my husband? Who was living in my house, using my name, playing house in my life? Her husband, I choked out. Yes, the concierge said, his attention drifting back to his computer, clearly bored with the conversation now that he had solved the mystery. Mr. Brad, he just called down. He is on his way out. Brad. My brother-in-law. Keisha's husband. The white guy who wore loafers without socks and called me kiddo while drinking my father's scotch. Brad was pretending to be my husband. Brad and Keisha were living in my apartment. They were the ones enjoying the view of Piedmont Park. They were the ones sleeping in the bedrooms, using the kitchen, living the life my grandfather had intended for me. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete. It felt like a physical blow to the gut. My father hadn't just stolen the apartment, he had given it to them. He had set them up in my home, likely telling them I knew, or maybe telling them I didn't matter. He had forged my signature. He had created a fake life for me, a fake marriage, just to let his golden child and her husband live in luxury while I rotted in a basement. Is he coming down now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The concierge nodded, not looking up. The elevator is moving. He will be here in a minute. I panicked. I couldn't face him yet. Not like this. Not in my chef whites smelling of grease, shaking with rage and shock. I needed to think. I needed to process this. I needed to get out. Thank you, I mumbled, backing away from the desk. I will come back. I forgot the receipt. I turned and walked toward the revolving doors, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't leave the building, though. I couldn't. I ducked behind a large, leafy potted plant near the entrance, a spot that offered a view of the elevators, but kept me hidden from the main thoroughfare. I waited, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A moment later, the elevator chime dinged softly. The doors slid open with a smooth whoosh. And there he was. Brad. He strolled out of the elevator like he owned the place. He was wearing designer sunglasses, a fitted polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and he was carrying a sleek leather gym bag. He looked relaxed, happy, wealthy. He walked right past the concierge desk, offering a casual wave. Car ready? Brad asked, his voice booming with the entitlement of a man who has never been told no. Pulling up now, Mr. Wilson, the concierge replied. Mr. Wilson? He was using my last name. He wasn't just living in my house, he was erasing me. He had taken my inheritance, my name, and my dignity. I watched as he walked through the glass doors and out into the sunlight, where a valet was holding open the door to my father's Range Rover. Keisha wasn't with him, but I knew she was upstairs. I could feel it. She was probably lounging on my sofa, drinking wine, laughing about how stupid I was. I stayed hidden until the Rover pulled away, merging into the traffic of Peachtree Road. Then I slowly sank onto a nearby bench in the lobby, burying my face in my hands. The reality of it was crushing. They had all been in on it. My father, my sister, my brother-in-law. They had looked me in the face. At brunch, watched me being humiliated. Watched me standing there in my work clothes, all while they held the keys to my kingdom in their pockets. They weren't just bad family. They were monsters. But as the initial wave of nausea passed, a new feeling took root in the pit of my stomach. It was cold. It was sharp. It was the same feeling I got when a line cook tried to sabotage my station. It was focus. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They thought I would go back to my basement and keep my mouth shut because I was afraid of losing the crumbs they swept off their table. They were wrong. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face with the rough sleeve of my chef's coat. I looked at the reflection of myself in the glass window of the lobby. I looked tired. I looked poor. But I also looked like someone with nothing left to lose. I pulled out my phone. I had one contact who might be able to help someone outside the family, someone who knew the law. I dialed the number. "Hello?" a voice answered. "Marcus?" I said, my voice steady for the first time in an hour. "It is Nia. I need a favor. A big one. I need to know how to evict a squatter." "And Marcus?" "The squatter is my sister." I hung up the phone before Marcus could answer. Legal advice could wait. Right now, I needed intel. I needed to see the life that was stolen from me with my own eyes. I sat on that bench in the lobby of the Sovereign, like a statue, my eyes glued to the elevator bank. The concierge was busy dealing with a delivery driver, ignoring me completely now that he had dismissed me as a nuisance. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. My phone buzzed with a text from the restaurant asking where I was. I ignored it. I was probably fired, but I didn't care. I was already watching my replacement life walk out the door. The elevator chimed again. This time it was Keisha. Seeing her was like taking a punch to the throat. She wasn't wearing just any dress. She was wearing a vintage Chanel tweed set that I knew for a fact my mother had been saving for a special occasion before she passed. Keisha had raided Mom's closet just like she had raided my inheritance. She looked effortless, wealthy, and completely at home in a lobby where I felt like an intruder. She didn't look at the concierge. She just breezed past him, checking her reflection in her phone screen, adjusting a diamond earring that glittered under the recessed lights. She walked out to the curb where my father's Range Rover was idling. Brad had looped back around. He hopped out to open the door for her, playing the role of the doting husband perfectly. I waited until they pulled away, then I sprinted to my Honda. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the door. I peeled out of the parking spot, running a red light to catch up to the black SUV weaving through the Buckhead traffic. They didn't go far. They pulled into the valet circle of the gallery district, specifically the High Museum of Art. There was a private auction happening. I could see the banners from the street. Modern Masters, exclusive viewing. It was the kind of event my father lived for, a place to be seen, to network, to pretend his liquidity problems didn't exist. I parked my car in a loading zone 3 blocks away, praying I wouldn't get towed, and ran toward the museum. The front entrance was guarded by security and a check-in team with iPads. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns were gliding up the stairs. I looked down at my chef whites. There was grease on my sleeve and flour on my pants. There was no way I was getting in the front door. I circled the building, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew the layout of this museum. I had catered an event here 2 years ago. There was a service entrance near the loading dock where the catering staff entered. I found the door propped open with a crate of sparkling water. I didn't hesitate. I slipped inside, the familiar noise of a busy kitchen washing over me. It was chaos. Waiters were polishing glasses, chefs were plating hors d'oeuvres with tweezers, and the air smelled of truffle oil and searing scallops. I grabbed a black apron off a hook near the door and tied it over my whites. I found a tray of empty champagne flutes and held it high, walking with purpose. In a kitchen, if you look like you are working, no one questions you. I blended right in. I made my way up the service elevator to the main gallery floor. The doors opened and I stepped out into a world of hushed conversations and soft jazz. I kept my head down, weaving through the crowd, my eyes scanning for Keisha and Brad. I found them near a massive abstract painting that looked like a splash of red paint on a black canvas. They were holding court with a group of young, wealthy socialites. Brad had a glass of whiskey in one hand and was gesturing expansively with the other. Keisha was laughing, that fake tinkling laugh she used when she wanted to charm someone. I moved closer, pretending to collect empty glasses from a nearby high-top table. My pulse was roaring in my ears, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to hear what they were saying. I needed to know the extent of the lie. "You guys are living the dream," one of the men in the group said. He was wearing a velvet blazer and had the kind of haircut that cost $300. "That penthouse is insane. I saw the stories on Insta. The view from that terrace is killer." Brad grinned, swirling his drink. "Yeah, it is not bad. We are still breaking it in. Keisha has been redecorating. You know how she is. She wanted to rip out the kitchen, but I told her to wait a few months." "Wait?" the man asked, leaning in. "I thought you guys were looking at buying in Vinings. How did you swing the sovereign? Did you rob a bank?" The group laughed. Keisha sipped her champagne, a smug smile playing on her lips. "It was a wedding gift, actually. Well, a late wedding gift, from my grandfather. He wanted to keep it in the family." I almost crushed the glass in my hand. A wedding gift. They were claiming it was theirs. But then Brad spoke up, his voice dropping an octave, the tone shifting from boastful to conspiratorial. "Technically," Brad said, leaning closer to his friend, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear, "it is a sweet setup. Byron, my father-in-law, is a genius. He put the deed in the sister's name." The friend looked confused. "The sister? You mean the chef?" "Yeah, the one who lives in the hood," Brad chuckled. "Nia. She has got clean credit but zero assets. Byron used her info to secure the financing and the title. It is for tax liability. If the IRS ever comes knocking, or if the market tanks, it is all on her. We get the keys, she gets the debt risk. It is basically a ghost asset. She does not even know she owns it." The room started to spin. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just theft, it was fraud. It was identity theft. My father had used my social security number, my identity, to buy a multi-million-dollar property. He had leveraged my clean, albeit poor credit history to shield himself and his golden child from financial ruin. I was the fall guy. If they stopped paying the mortgage, I would be the one foreclosed on. If the taxes weren't paid, the IRS would come for me, not them. I wasn't just a discarded daughter, I was a human shield. And Keisha knew. She was standing right there nodding along as her husband bragged about ruining my life. "She is so out of the loop," Keisha chimed in, rolling her eyes. "She thinks she is noble for being poor. Dad said she would never check her credit report because she is too afraid of seeing her student loan balance. It is the perfect crime, really. We live like kings, and if anything goes wrong, Nia takes the fall." I backed away, my legs trembling so violently I could barely walk. I retreated into the shadows of a sculpture display, fighting the urge to vomit. This was evil. There was no other word for it. They looked at me and saw a tool, a disposable object. My father didn't protect my inheritance. He weaponized it against me. I needed to get out. I needed air. But as I turned to head back to the service elevator, I bumped into a waiter. A tray of crab cakes went flying. The crash was deafening in the quiet gallery. "Watch it," the waiter hissed. I mumbled an apology and bent down to help him, desperate to hide my face. But it was too late. Now the voice was sharp, commanding. It was my father, Byron Wilson. He was standing 10 feet away talking to a senator. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, taking in the chef's apron, the mess on the floor, the look of absolute horror on my face. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, stepping away from the senator and marching toward me. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "You are embarrassing me. Are you working catering now? I told you not to show your face in my circles." I looked up at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man I had tried to please my entire life. And for the first time, I didn't see a father. I saw a criminal. I heard them, I whispered. I heard Brad. "I know about the deed. I know you forged my signature." Byron's face went stone cold. The shock vanished, replaced by a terrifying menace. He leaned down, his mouth close to my ear, his cologne smelling of sandalwood and betrayal. "You heard nothing," he snarled. "You are tired. You are delusional." "I know it is in my name, Dad," I hissed back, pulling my arm away. "The concierge told me. I own Unit 05, and you are using me to launder your lifestyle." Byron looked around quickly to ensure no one was listening. He grabbed me again, dragging me toward the service exit. "Listen to me, you little ungrateful brat," he spat. "You own nothing. You are a name on a piece of paper. That is it. I paid for it. I maintain it. You are just the vessel. And if you open your mouth if you try to claim it, or tell anyone about this, I will bury you." "Bury me." I laughed a hysterical, broken sound. "I am already buried. Dad, I live in a basement. You have no idea what power looks like," Byron said, his voice low and dangerous. "I can make sure you never work in this city again. I can make your student loans default tomorrow. I can have you arrested for trespassing right now. Who are they going to believe, the respected developer or the hysterical line cook who broke into a private event?" He opened the service door and shoved me out onto the loading dock. The humidity hit me like a wall. "Go home, Nia," he commanded. "Go back to your basement. Let the adults handle the business. And do not go near the Sovereign again. If I see you there, I will call the police." He slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the alley, surrounded by dumpsters and the hum of the city. My apron was stained. My hands were shaking. I was alone. But as I stood there listening to the lock click shut, the fear began to recede. He was scared. I saw it in his eyes right before he shoved me. He was terrified. Because he knew what I knew. He had made one critical mistake. He had put the apartment in my name. He had made me the legal owner. He thought I was too weak, too stupid, too poor to do anything about it. He thought he could bully me into silence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I had recorded the conversation. Not all of it, but enough. I had hit the record button the moment I saw Brad bragging. I had audio of Brad admitting the fraud. I had audio of my father threatening me. I walked to my car, my steps steady on the pavement. I wasn't going back to the basement to cry. I was going to war. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. I needed someone who hated Byron Wilson as much as I did right now. I needed someone who knew where the bodies were buried. I sat in the driver's seat and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number. It was an old number one I hadn't used in years. "Uncle Marcus," I said when he picked up. "It is Nia. I need to cash in that favor you owe Grandpa. And bring your best suit. We are going to evict my father." The drive back to East Point was a blur of red taillights and blinding rage that made my hands tremble on the steering wheel. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway of the crumbling triplex where I rented the basement, the reality of my life crashed down on me with the weight of a collapsing building. The air here didn't smell like sandalwood or expensive perfume. It smelled of wet concrete exhaust fumes and the distinct earthy scent of mildew that never quite left my clothes. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the peeling paint on the front door, trying to reconcile the two worlds I had inhabited in the last 4 hours. In Buckhead, I was Nia Wilson, owner of a multi-million-dollar penthouse with a view of the city skyline. Here I was, just the girl in 3B, who prayed the heavy rains wouldn't flood her living room again. I dragged myself out of the car, my chef's clogs crunching on the gravel. The motion sensor light above the door flickered and died, plunging the entryway into darkness. It felt fitting. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the mailbox. It was stuffed full, a week's worth of mail I hadn't had the energy to collect. I grabbed the stack, unlocked the door, and stepped into the stagnant air of my apartment. I tossed the mail onto the small, wobbling table I used for dining, working and folding laundry. I just wanted to shower. I wanted to scrub the feeling of my father's grip off my arm and the memory of Keisha's laughter out of my ears. But as I turned away, something in the pile caught my eye. It wasn't the usual colorful flyers for pizza deals or the white envelopes of utility bills. It was a thick brown envelope with a window on the front. The return address was stamped in stark, authoritative black ink. Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. My stomach dropped. I paid my taxes. I filed them early every year, terrified of making a mistake. I reached out and picked up the envelope, my fingers leaving a smudge of flour on the paper. It felt heavy, ominous. I tore it open, the sound loud in the quiet apartment. I pulled out the letter, unfolding the crisp pages. Notice of intent to levy. The words swam before my eyes. I scanned down the page, looking for the numbers, looking for the mistake. And then I saw it. The property address was listed clearly. Unit 05, The Sovereign, Peachtree Road. The assessed amount due was bolded, a number that made the air leave my lungs in a rush. $50,000. I sank onto the floor, my legs refusing to hold me up any longer. $50,000 in unpaid property taxes. I stared at the number until it blurred. I didn't make $50,000 a year. If I worked every holiday, every overtime shift available, and sold my plasma on the weekends, I wouldn't clear that amount. And the IRS wanted it now. The realization hit me like a physical slap. This was the genius of Byron Wilson. This was why the deed was in my name. It wasn't just about hiding assets or laundering money. It was about liability. High-end real estate came with high-end bills, property taxes, HOA fees, insurance. My father and Brad were living the lifestyle, hosting the parties and soaking up the admiration of their peers, but they weren't paying the government. They were letting the debt pile up under my Social Security number. I was not just the discarded daughter. I was the trash can. I was the place they threw everything they didn't want to deal with. If the IRS came to seize assets, they wouldn't take Brad's car or my father's business accounts. They would come for me. They would garnish my wages. They would ruin a credit score I had spent years trying to build back up from zero. My phone began to ring, the shrill sound piercing the silence of the basement. I looked at the screen. It was him. Byron. The audacity was breathtaking. He had shoved me into an alley less than an hour ago, and now he was calling me. I stared at the phone, watching it vibrate against the linoleum floor. A part of me wanted to throw it against the wall. A bigger part of me, the part that was currently holding a $50,000 tax bill, knew I had to answer. I needed to hear him say it. I needed him to confirm exactly how little I meant to him. I swiped answer and put the phone to my ear, not saying a word. "I know you are there, Nia." His voice was calm, dangerously so. It was the voice he used when he was closing a deal, the voice that masked a shark's intent with a businessman's cadence. "I heard you went to the Sovereign. I heard you were harassing the staff." I looked at the tax bill in my lap. "I am not the one harassing people, Dad. The IRS is. I just got a letter. $50,000 in back taxes for a home I have never stepped foot inside." There was a pause on the other end, a heavy silence where I could hear him breathing. When he spoke again, the calm was gone, replaced by a sharp, impatient edge. "That is just paperwork, Nia. Do not be dramatic. It goes to your address because that is the billing address on file. I handle the finances. I will take care of it. You have not taken care of it." I snapped, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "It is a notice of intent to levy. That means they are done asking nicely. They are coming for my money, my paycheck, the money I use to buy food." "You listen to me," he growled. "You are looking at this all wrong. I am building equity in your name. When we sell that place in a few years, who do you think gets the credit history boost? I am doing you a favor. But you are too short-sighted to see it. You are too busy playing the victim to realize I am setting you up for the future." "Setting me up?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "You are setting me up to take the fall," Brad told his friend's dad. I heard him. He said I am the ghost asset. He said if the market tanks or the taxman comes, it is all on me. Byron let out a sigh of frustration, the sound of a parent dealing with a toddler who refuses to eat their vegetables. "Brad talks too much. He likes to sound smart. But he is right about one thing: you are the safety net. That is your role in this family. We all have roles, Nia. Keisha is the face. Brad is the connection. I am the engine. And you are the foundation. You carry the weight so the structure doesn't collapse. The foundation. He called me the foundation. But foundations get buried. Foundations get poured over with concrete and never seen again. Foundations crack under pressure so the penthouse can stay pretty. So I am the sacrifice, I whispered, the tears finally spilling over. You are willing to ruin me. You are willing to let me go to jail for tax evasion just so Keisha can have a walk-in closet. Do not be dazed, he spat. Nobody is going to jail. I will pay the bill. Eventually. But you need to keep your mouth shut. If you go running to the police or your grandfather with some hysterical story, think about what happens. Brad loses his investors. His reputation is destroyed. My company takes a hit and creditors call in my loans. The whole house of cards falls down. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the reason this family loses everything? Do you want to be the reason your sister ends up on the street? The manipulation was masterful. He was twisting the knife, turning his crimes into my responsibility. If I spoke up, I was the villain. If I protected myself, I was destroying the family. For years, that logic had worked. For years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. But looking around my damp, dark apartment, holding the proof of his betrayal in my hand, the spell broke. I am already on the street, Dad. I said, my voice cold and steady. You put me here. You left me here. And now you are billing me for the privilege of watching you live my life. Nia, don't you dare, he threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You are a line cook. You have no resources. You have no friends in this town who matter. If you fight me, I will crush you. I will make sure you can't get a job washing dishes in a Waffle House. I will bury you under so much legal paperwork you will never see the sun again. Just give me the letter. I will have my accountant handle it. Go back to work. Be a good girl. He hung up. The line went dead. I sat there in the silence, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a warning. He thought he had won. He thought he had scared me back into my box. He thought I was just Nia, the disappointment, the one who couldn't handle the pressure. But he was wrong. He hadn't just given me a debt. He had given me a weapon. The deed was in my name. The tax bill was in my name. That meant the property was mine, not partially, not theoretically, legally. If I was responsible for the debt, I was entitled to the asset. I stood up, my knees cracking, and wiped the tears from my face. I walked over to the small table and picked up the letter. I smoothed out the wrinkles. Then I picked up my phone and looked at the recording I had made in the museum. I had Brad's confession. I had my father's threats. And now I had the IRS confirming my ownership. I wasn't the foundation, I was the demolition crew, and I was about to bring the whole house down. I grabbed my keys and the envelope. I wasn't going to work. I had a meeting to arrange, not with my father's accountant, but with the only person my father actually feared. It was time to call Grandpa Ezekiel, but first I had to get into that apartment. I had to change the locks, and I knew exactly who could help me do it. I sat on the edge of my sagging mattress and stared at the tax notice until the numbers blurred together. My instinct was to scream, to drive back to Buckhead and burn the whole building down, but the conversation with Uncle Marcus had cooled my blood. He had told me that anger without leverage was just noise, and if I wanted to win, I had to play the part they had written for me one last time. I needed them to believe I was the scared, incompetent daughter who crumbled under pressure. I dialed my father's number, forcing my breathing to become shallow and erratic, summoning the panic that used to be my constant companion. "Dad," I whispered when he answered, letting my voice tremble. "I am so scared. The IRS letter says they are going to garnish my wages. I cannot lose my job at the restaurant. If the head chef finds out I have tax trouble, he will fire me. I do not know what to do." Byron's voice changed instantly. The menace from the alley was gone, replaced by a smooth, predatory warmth that was almost more terrifying. "Nia, honey, calm down. I told you I would handle it. You are working yourself up over standard bureaucratic nonsense. This is exactly why I said you were not ready for the burden of ownership. It is too much stress for you. I know I sobbed, hating the way the lie tasted on my tongue. You were right. I am not good with this stuff. I just want it to stop. Please, Dad, make it stop. I can fix it, Nia, but I need you to trust me. I need full legal authority to deal with the IRS on your behalf. My lawyer drafted a power of attorney and a transfer of asset management. It just says that I take care of the headaches so you do not have to. I will send a courier over with the papers. Just sign them and this all goes away. You can go back to your cooking and I will handle the government. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, looking at it with pure disgust. He was trying to trick me into signing away the penthouse legally. He wanted to turn his fraud into a legitimate theft. Okay, Dad, I said, bringing the phone back. Send it. I just want to sleep. An hour later, a bike messenger dropped off a thick envelope. I did not sign it. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner where Marcus was waiting in a back booth. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp as he scanned the documents. He let out a low whistle. Your father is a piece of work, Nia. This isn't just a power of attorney. Buried in the fine print of this asset management agreement is a clause that signs over your rights to any future inheritance from your grandfather in exchange for debt relief on the current property. He is trying to disinherit you retroactively. If you sign this, he gets the penthouse, he gets the trust fund, and he gets to look like the hero who saved you from the IRS. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He knew about the trust fund. He knew everything Grandpa had planned, and he was trying to steal it all before the old man even died. So I do not sign, I said. No. Marcus replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. You do not sign, but you do not tell him that yet. You tell him you need a notary and that your work schedule is crazy. You stall. We need more than just the tax bill, Nia. We need to know what else he is hiding in that apartment. We need the receipts. The opportunity to get those receipts came 2 days later, wrapped in a family crisis that was almost comical in its timing. Grandpa Ezekiel called my father and announced he was delaying his flight back to Florida. He wanted to host a farewell dinner to celebrate the new apartment. He specifically requested that the dinner be held at the penthouse so he could see how I had settled in. The panic in the Wilson family group chat, which I was usually excluded from, but had been added to for logistical purposes, was palpable. My phone buzzed with a call from Keisha. You need to get over to the Sovereign right now, she hissed, skipping any greeting. Grandpa wants to have dinner at the apartment tonight. I paused, counting to 3. Why are you calling me? You live there. You and Brad have made yourselves quite comfortable. Do not get smart with me, Nia. This is serious. If Grandpa finds out Brad and I are living there, he will cut Dad's funding. If Dad gets cut off, the company goes under. And if the company goes under, who do you think pays your little tax bill? We are all in the same boat. We were not in the same boat. They were on a yacht and I was treading water, but I needed access to that apartment. What do you need me to do? I asked, feigning resignation. We are moving our personal stuff into the storage unit down the hall, she said, the sound of hangers clattering in the background. You need to come over and act like you live here. Put some of your cheap clothes in the closet. Put your spices in the kitchen. Make it look like a struggling chef lives here. And for God's sake, shower before you come. I do not want my furniture smelling like grease. I hung up and smiled. It was time to go home. I arrived at the Sovereign an hour later. The concierge looked confused as I walked in, but Keisha had clearly called down because he handed me a key fob without a word. I took the elevator to the penthouse, my heart pounding not with fear, but with anticipation. The doors opened directly into the living room. It was chaotic. Brad was frantically stuffing designer suits into a garment bag, sweating through his linen shirt. Keisha was running around, throwing throw pillows into a bin. The apartment was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing the Atlanta skyline, white marble floors, and furniture that cost more than my life's wages. But it was cluttered with their excess. You are late, Brad snapped, not looking at me. Do not just stand there. Help me move these golf clubs. And do not scratch them. I did not move. I watched them scurry around like rats on a sinking ship. Look at you, I said softly, terrified of an 80-year-old man. Keisha stopped a stack of fashion magazines in her arms. We are protecting the family legacy, Nia, something you wouldn't understand. Now get in the kitchen and set up your props. We left some space in the pantry. I walked into the kitchen. It was magnificent. A Viking range of sub-zero fridge countertops that went on for miles. I placed my bag of cheap spices on the counter, playing my part, but my eyes were scanning the room. I wasn't looking for cooking utensils. I was looking for where they kept their secrets. While Keisha and Brad were arguing in the hallway about which shoes to hide, I slipped into the master bedroom. It smelled of Keisha's expensive perfume and Brad's cigars. I went straight to the walk-in closet. It was empty of clothes, but on the top shelf pushed back into the corner was a small, heavy steel safe. I knew my father. He didn't trust banks and he didn't trust digital clouds. He liked hard copies. If there was dirt, it was in there. I dragged a chair over and climbed up. The safe had a digital keypad. I tried my father's birthday. Error. I tried his anniversary. Error. I paused, thinking about the psychology of Byron Wilson and his golden child. He didn't love my mother enough to use her birthday. He didn't respect Brad enough to use his. It had to be Keisha. It was always Keisha. I punched in the digits of my sister's birthday. The light turned green. The mechanism clicked. My heart soared with a dark, vindictive joy. It opened. Inside there were stacks of cash, thick bands of $100 bills. But I ignored the money. I reached for the manila envelopes underneath. I pulled them out and sat on the floor of the closet, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. The first document was the deed showing my name clear as day with a signature that was a laughable forgery of my own. But below that was a ledger. It was handwritten in Brad's scrawl. It detailed transfers from my father's construction firm to a shell company called Piedmont Consulting. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos. Then I found the bank statements for Piedmont Consulting. The expenses weren't for building materials or contractors. They were for jewelry leases on luxury cars and monthly transfers to a woman named Candy with an I. Brad wasn't just living off my father. He was embezzling from him. He was draining the company accounts to fund a side life that Keisha clearly knew nothing about. And my father, in his arrogance, was using my identity to launder the money he did have, to hide it from the IRS, funneling it through the property taxes and maintenance fees of this apartment. This wasn't just tax evasion. This was a circular firing squad of betrayal. Brad was stealing from Byron. Byron was using me to hide his assets. And Keisha was the clueless princess in the middle, thinking she was the queen of the castle. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Nia, Keisha screamed. "Where the hell are you? Grandpa will be here in 20 minutes. I shoved the papers back into the envelope, but I kept 2 pieces out. I folded them small and tucked them into my bra. I closed the safe, scrambled down from the chair, and smoothed my hair. I walked out of the closet just as Keisha burst into the bedroom. "What were you doing in here?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "I was checking the bathroom," I lied, keeping my voice flat. "You left your makeup bag on the counter." "Grandpa hates clutter, remember?" Keisha huffed, pushing past me to grab the bag. "You are useless. Just go stand in the living room and try not to look poor." I walked out to the living room, my heart beating a rhythm of pure adrenaline. I stood by the window looking out at the view of Piedmont Park that was legally mine. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I touched the spot on my chest where the papers were hidden. The doorbell rang. It was time. My father entered first, looking flustered and sweaty. He shot me a warning glare that promised violence if I stepped out of line. Then Grandpa Ezekiel walked in, leaning on his cane, looking frail but sharp. He smiled when he saw me. "Naya," he said warmly, "you look wonderful. The place looks wonderful." I smiled back, a genuine smile this time. "Thank you, Grandpa. I am really starting to feel at home here." Byron flinched. Brad poured himself a stiff drink. Keisha forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. We sat down to dinner, a meal catered by my father's favorite steakhouse, because they didn't trust me to cook. The conversation was strained. Byron kept steering the talk toward business, toward how well the company was doing, loud and boastful. So Ezekiel said, cutting through Byron's monologue about market shares, "Nia, have you found the little extra gift I left for you?" The table froze. Byron looked at his father. What gift? Ezekiel ignored him, keeping his eyes on me. "In the safe, Nia. In the master bedroom. I left a little something to help you get your catering business started. A trust certificate. Did you find it?" I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back in a flush of heat. The safe. He knew about the safe. He thought I was using the safe. I looked at Byron. He looked like he was having a stroke. He hadn't told me about the safe because he had been using it. He must have removed Grandpa's gift and replaced it with his own dirty secrets, thinking I would never get in. Keisha laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Oh, Grandpa, you know Nia. She is scatterbrained. She probably lost the combination." I stood up slowly. The room went silent. I looked at my father, then at Brad, then at Keisha. I saw the fear in their eyes. They were terrified I would say the wrong thing. They had no idea I was about to say the right thing. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing clear in the large room, "I did find the safe, Grandpa. But I couldn't open it with my birthday." Byron's eyes bulged. "Nia, sit down," he growled. I ignored him. I walked over to the huge television mounted on the wall. I pulled the HDMI cable from the cable box and plugged it into my phone. I couldn't open it. I continued looking at Brad because the code wasn't my birthday. It was Keisha's. "What is she doing?" Brad stood up, his face red. I tapped my screen. The huge TV flickered to life. The first image that popped up was the photo I had just taken in the closet. The ledger, the handwriting, the payments to Candy. And when I finally got it open, I said, turning to face the room, "I didn't find a trust certificate. I think Dad must have moved that for safekeeping. But I did find this." The image on the screen shifted. It was the bank statement showing the embezzlement. "Brad?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Who is Candy? And why is she getting $5,000 a month from the company construction fund?" Keisha let out a strangled gasp. Brad lunged for me. "Turn it off!" Byron screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "You ungrateful little witch!" But Grandpa Ezekiel didn't move. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at his son. And then he tapped his cane on the floor, a sharp, hollow sound that stopped Brad in his tracks. "Sit down," Bradley Grandpa said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of 50 years of building an empire. Brad froze. Byron slumped in his chair. Keisha was staring at the screen, her mouth open in horror. "Nia," Grandpa said softly. "What else is in there?" I scrolled to the next image. The tax evasion documents. The letters from the IRS addressed to me that were hidden in the safe. "Dad has been using my social security number to hide assets," I said. "He hasn't paid taxes on this place in 2 years. He is waiting for the IRS to come after me so he can buy it back at auction under a different LLC." Byron put his head in his hands. The silence in the room was absolute. The air conditioning hummed. The ice melted in the glasses. Grandpa Ezekiel stood up. He looked taller than he had in years. He walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. He looked at the screen, then at his son. "I built this family on hard work," Ezekiel said, his voice trembling with rage. "I built it on honor. I gave you everything, Byron. And you stole from your own daughter. You stole her name. You stole her future. It was for the family," Byron yelled, desperate tears springing to his eyes. "We were underwater. I needed liquidity. Nia wasn't using the credit." Grandpa raised his hand, silencing him. "You failed the test, Byron." "Test," Keisha whispered. "I knew about the money problems," Ezekiel said. "I knew about the mismanagement. I bought this apartment for Nia because she was the only one who never asked me for a dime. I wanted to see if you would let her have it. I wanted to see if you could be decent for once in your life." He looked at Brad. "You are fired. You will leave this building tonight." If you take so much as a spoon, I will call the police and add theft to the embezzlement charges I am filing tomorrow." He looked at Keisha. "You stood by and watched them do this to your sister. You laughed at her. You are out of the will, Keisha. You can go live with your husband wherever he ends up. And you," he said, looking at Byron with a look of pure disgust, "you are no longer CEO. I am triggering the morality clause in the company bylaws. You are done." Grandpa turned to me. He smiled, and it was the warmest thing I had ever seen. "Nia," he said, "change the locks. This is your home, and do not worry about the tax bill. I will handle the IRS. As for the trust certificate," he reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope. "I never put it in the safe. I knew he would steal it. Here." He handed it to me. I opened it. It was a check for $2 million, seed money for a restaurant. I looked at my father, broken in his chair. I looked at Keisha, sobbing as she realized her life was over. I looked at Brad, terrified and exposed. I took the check. "Get out of my house," I said. And for the first time in my life, they listened. The evening of the farewell dinner arrived wrapped in a facade of opulence that felt brittle enough to snap. The penthouse was transformed. Caterers I had hired with money I did not have were circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my monthly rent. The air smelled of expensive cologne, roasted duck, and the metallic tang of fear radiating from my father and sister. Byron had invited his board of directors and 2 potential investors, turning a family gathering into a showcase of his supposed stability. He needed them to see the penthouse, to see the wealth, to believe the lie that the Wilson empire was thriving. Keisha played the part of the hostess to perfection, wearing a silk gown that shimmered under the recessed lighting, clinging to Brad's arm as they laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I stood by the kitchen island in a simple black dress, watching them perform. To the guests, I was just the quiet daughter, perhaps a little eccentric for living in a basement, but tonight, I was the silent detonator in the room. Grandpa Ezekiel sat at the head of the long marble dining table, looking frail but observant. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the nervous energy of his son and the forced gaiety of his granddaughter. When we finally sat down to eat, Byron raised a glass of vintage Bordeaux. To family, he bellowed, his smile tight. To legacy. And to my father, the man who started it all. The guests murmured their assent, clinking crystal. Keisha leaned over to Grandpa, placing a hand on his withered arm. "We are just so grateful you let us host this, Granddad. Nia did a great job with the decorations, didn't she? We helped her pick out the flowers, of course." I took a sip of water, letting the lie slide. Grandpa looked at me, a small, unreadable smile playing on his lips. "It is a beautiful home, Nia. I am glad to see you settling in. Tell me, did you ever manage to open the safe in the master closet? I left a little something in there for you. A stock certificate for your portfolio. I wanted to make sure you had a cushion for your business." The sound of cutlery scraping against china ceased instantly. Byron went pale, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He froze because he knew he hadn't told me about the safe. He thought he had cleaned it out months ago when he first seized the apartment. He thought he was the only one who knew what was inside. Keisha's eyes darted to Brad, panic flaring behind her false lashes. She cleared her throat, her voice pitching an octave higher. "Oh, Granddad, you know Nia. She is so forgetful. I think she mentioned finding a lovely necklace, right, Nia? She put it in a safety deposit box at the bank for safekeeping." Byron jumped in, his voice booming too loud in the quiet room. "Exactly. We handled it for her dad. You know Nia isn't comfortable with high-value assets in the house. We didn't want to worry you." I set my glass down on the table with a deliberate, heavy clink. I stood up slowly. The room went deathly silent. The investors looked up, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I smoothed the front of my dress and looked directly at my grandfather. "Actually, that is not true," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady. "I did not find a necklace, Grandpa. And I did not lose the combination. The reason I could not open the safe at first was that the code wasn't my birthday." Byron's eyes bulged, He looked like a cornered animal. "Nia, sit down," he growled through gritted teeth. "This is not the time for your stories." I ignored him. I picked up the remote control for the 85-inch television mounted on the wall behind Byron. I had synced it to my phone earlier while the caterers were setting up. I pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow over the dinner table. I tried my birthday. I continued walking toward the screen. I tried Dad's birthday. I even tried Mom's, but none of them worked. The only code that opened the safe in my apartment was Keisha's birthday. "What is she doing?" Brad hissed, starting to rise from his chair. Byron slammed his hand on the table. "Nia, stop this instant. You are embarrassing the family." I tapped my phone screen. The first image appeared on the massive TV. It was a high-resolution photo of the open safe. But it wasn't empty and it didn't contain a stock certificate. It contained stacks of cash and a ledger. When I finally got it open this afternoon, I didn't find a gift. I said, turning to face the investors who were now staring at the screen with wide eyes. "I found this ledger. It is in Brad's handwriting." The image shifted. A video began to play. It was grainy footage from the security camera inside the penthouse living room footage I had accessed using the administrator codes I found in the safe's documents. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. It showed Brad walking into the apartment, but he wasn't with Keisha. He was with a woman with platinum blonde hair. They were laughing, stumbling over each other, kicking off their shoes. Brad's face drained of blood. He looked at the investors, then at Keisha. Keisha let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Who is Candy with an eye?" "Brad," I asked, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "And why does the ledger show you paying her $5,000 a month from the company's construction fund?" "You liar!" Brad shouted, lunging toward me. "That is fake." She doctored it. "Sit down." Grandpa Ezekiel's voice cracked like a whip. He didn't stand up, but the authority in his tone slammed Brad back into his chair. I swiped the screen again. A new document appeared. It was a bank statement. It showed a wire transfer of $50,000 from Wilson Development into an account named Nia Wilson Holdings. "And Dad," I said, turning my gaze to my father, "I found the tax letters you hid in the safe, the ones from the IRS. You have been using my social security number to open shell accounts. You are funneling company money into accounts under my name to hide it from the auditors, and then you are letting the property taxes pile up so I take the fall. You stole my identity to launder money." The investors were whispering now, pulling out their phones. One of them stood up, throwing his napkin on the table. "Byron, is this true? Are you leveraging family assets to cook the books?" "It is a misunderstanding," Byron screamed, sweat beading on his forehead. "She is mentally unstable. She lives in a basement. She doesn't know what she is looking at." I swiped one last time. A screenshot of a text conversation appeared. It was between Keisha and Byron. "Keisha, Grandpa is such a senile old bat. As soon as he kicks the bucket, we sell the penthouse and split the cash. I can't wait to get that smell of old people out of my life." Byron: "Just play along for a few more months. Once he's gone, we dump the debt on Nia and walk away rich." The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Keisha began to sob, a raw, ugly sound. She looked at Grandpa, reaching out a trembling hand. "Granddad, I didn't mean it. I was venting. It was a joke." Grandpa Ezekiel slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked taller than I had ever seen him, a titan of industry who had built an empire from dirt. He looked at the screen, reading the words of the son and granddaughter he had supported their entire lives. Then he looked at Byron. "You failed the test, Byron," Grandpa said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. "Test, Byron," whispered, his arrogance evaporating into terror. "I knew about the liquidity problems," Ezekiel said. "I have friends at the bank, Byron. I knew you were bleeding money. I knew Brad was incompetent. I bought this apartment for Nia because she was the only one who never asked me for a dime. She was the only one who worked for what she had. I wanted to see if you could be decent. I wanted to see if you would let her have one thing. Just one thing. He looked at the investors. Gentlemen, I apologize for this display, but I think you have seen enough to know that Wilson Development is under new management as of tonight. He turned his gaze to Brad. You are fired. You will leave this building immediately. If you take so much as a silver spoon from this apartment, I will have the police waiting in the lobby. I am filing embezzlement charges in the morning. Brad looked at Keisha, desperate for an ally, but she was staring at the video of him and Candy still paused on the screen, her face twisted in hate. Get out! She screamed at him, throwing her wine glass. It shattered against his chest, staining his white shirt red. Get out! Brad scrambled backward, knocking over his chair, and fled the apartment without a word. Grandpa looked at Keisha. You stood by and watched them do this. You laughed at your sister while she lived in squalor and you paraded around in her home. You are out of the will, Keisha. You have the car I bought you, and that is it. Figure out how to pay for your own lifestyle. And you, he said, turning to Byron. My father was shaking, tears streaming down his face, a pathetic figure stripped of his power. Dad, please. We can fix this. I did it for the family. You did it for yourself, Grandpa spat. You are no longer CEO. I am activating the morality clause in the company bylaws. You are removed from the board effective immediately. The company lawyers will be in touch about the tax fraud. You are on your own, Byron. Grandpa turned to me. His face softened, the anger replaced by a deep, weary pride. Nia, he said, I am sorry it had to happen this way. But the truth had to come out. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. I never put the stock certificate in the safe, he said, handing it to me. I knew he would break into it eventually. I kept this for you. I opened the envelope. Inside was a bank draft, a cashier's check for $2 million, and underneath it a deed transfer for the commercial space on the ground floor of the Sovereign. This is for your restaurant, he said. No more basements, no more sous chef. You are the owner now. I looked at the check. I looked at my father slumped in his chair, ruined. I looked at Keisha wailing into her hands. I looked at the view of the city that was finally truly mine. I took the check. I walked over to the door and held it open. Get out of my house, I said to my father and sister. Byron looked at me, his eyes full of venom, but he saw the investors watching. He saw Grandpa standing behind me like a stone wall. He stood up, straightening his jacket with trembling hands, and walked out. Keisha followed him, sobbing, dragging her designer gown across the floor. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was light. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. 3 months later, the spring sun warmed the patio of Nia's table, the new bistro occupying the prime corner spot of the Sovereign. The lunch rush was just ending. I wiped my hands on my apron, a pristine white one, with my name embroidered on the chest. The dining room was full. The reviews had been glowing. I walked out to the terrace where Grandpa Ezekiel was sitting at his usual table enjoying a bowl of gumbo. He looked better, healthier than he had in years. The stress of carrying a dead-weight family had been lifted off him too. How is it, Grandpa? I asked, pouring him more iced tea. Perfect, he said, patting my hand. Just like you. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from a news app. Local developer Byron Wilson, indicted on tax fraud and embezzlement charges. Below it was a smaller headline. Socialite Keisha Wilson files for bankruptcy following divorce. I swiped the notification away. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't feel sad. I just felt done. They were facing the consequences of their own greed. They had sold their house to pay the legal fees. They were living in a rental now, a small 2-bedroom in a neighborhood they used to make fun of. I looked up at the penthouse balcony far above us. Tonight, I would go up there, kick off my shoes, and drink a glass of wine while looking at the lights of the city. I would sleep in a bed that I owned in a life that I had fought for. I put my phone away and smiled at my grandfather. "Can I get you anything else?" I asked. He shook his head, looking at the bustling restaurant, at the life bubbling around us. "No, Nia," he said. "I think we have everything we need." And for the first time in my life, I knew he was right. Nia's journey reveals a harsh but liberating truth: your value is never defined by those who refuse to see it. For years, she accepted crumbs while secretly being the foundation of her family's survival. However, silence in the face of exploitation isn't loyalty, it is self-betrayal. Grandpa Ezekiel didn't reward Nia simply because she was family, he rewarded her integrity and resilience. This story reminds us that while toxic people may build empires on lies, character is the only foundation that truly lasts. True power comes from the courage to demand the respect you deserve and walk away from those who cannot give it. If you believe that integrity always wins in the end, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.